I remember the exact second my marriage cracked in half. It was Thanksgiving night, the table was full, the house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon, and my father-in-law stood up with a glass of wine and said, "I think it's time we stop pretending Daniel only has one family." And just like that, every fork stopped midair, every voice went quiet, and I felt 30 pairs of eyes slowly turn toward me like I was the only one who didn't get the joke. I laughed at first because I thought I had misunderstood, but then I looked at my husband and he wouldn't look back, not at me, not even for a second. His eyes stayed locked on his plate like if he didn't move this moment might disappear. And that's when something inside me shifted, something cold and sharp, because that wasn't confusion on his face, it was guilt. And in that instant, every late night, every canceled plan, every weekend he said he was out of town, came rushing back all at once like pieces of a story I never realized I was living in. Before I go any further, if this story speaks to your heart, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always read them and it reminds me how far stories can travel. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old. And 3 weeks ago was the night I realized my marriage wasn't just broken, it was never real to begin with. But to understand how I ended up sitting at that table while my entire world quietly collapsed around me, you need to go back to where this all started. Because the truth is, there were signs, small ones at first, easy to ignore, easy to explain away, and I ignored every single one of them. Until the night his father said it out loud and forced me to see what had been right in front of me the whole time. And the worst part is, everyone else at that table already knew something I didn't, something they had been hiding from me for years, something they had been hiding from me for years. And I had no idea just how deep that secret really went. I met Daniel Carter on a rainy afternoon in Seattle, the kind of slow gray day where everything feels quieter than it should. And he walked into the small accounting office where I worked part-time, shook my hand, and looked me straight in the eye like I was the only person in the room, which did not happen often in my life. I grew up in a house where attention was something you earned, not something you were given. My parents were not cruel, not in any obvious way, but they were practical people. My older brother Mark was the one with ambition, the one who got the extra support, the new laptop for college, the weekend drives to visit campuses, while I got the advice to choose something stable, something safe, something that would not require too much investment. "You have always been good at staying out of trouble, Emily," my mother used to say, like that was the highest compliment she could offer. So I built a life around being low maintenance, low expectation, low priority, and Daniel changed that. At least, that is what I believed at the time. He was attentive in ways that felt almost too precise. He remembered small things, the way I took my coffee, the fact that I always carried a blue pen instead of a black one. He asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. And when he talked about his family, it sounded polished, almost rehearsed. His father ran a successful logistics company. His mother volunteered at every charity event in their town, and everything about them felt structured, controlled, impressive. The first time I visited their house, I remember noticing how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, but careful quiet. Like everyone was measuring their words before speaking. His mother, Linda, smiled at me but never quite looked at me. His father, Robert, shook my hand and asked me what I did for a living, and when I answered, he nodded once and moved on without another question. I told myself they were just formal, just different from what I was used to, but there were small things, little moments that did not fit, like how Daniel would step outside to take certain calls and lower his voice, or how he would disappear for entire Saturdays with a simple work emergency and come back exhausted but unable to explain what had actually happened. Once, about 6 months into our relationship, I showed up at his apartment unannounced with takeout, thinking it would be a nice surprise, and his reaction was not what I expected. He froze for half a second before opening the door wider, like I had interrupted something I was not supposed to see. But when I looked around, everything seemed normal, clean kitchen, television on, nothing out of place. I laughed it off and told myself I was overthinking. because that was easier than asking questions. I was not sure I wanted answered. When he proposed a year later, it felt like validation. Like I had finally been chosen in a way that mattered. His family attended the engagement dinner. His mother brought a gift. His father made a short toast about commitment and responsibility. And for the first time, I felt like I had stepped into something solid, something stable, something that would not disappear if I just did everything right. But looking back now, there was one moment that should have stopped me. One small detail that did not belong. The night of our engagement, his phone buzzed twice in a row, and when I glanced at the screen, I saw a name I had never heard before followed by a single word. "Are you coming?" And the way his face changed when he saw me notice it, that was the first crack, the first quiet signal that my life was about to shift in a way I did not understand yet. I wish I could say the warning signs stopped after that night, but they did not. They only became easier to ignore because I had already chosen my version of the truth, the version where everything made sense, the version where I was finally part of something stable. We got married 8 months later in a small ceremony just outside Portland. 60 guests, soft lights, white roses, and vows that sounded honest when he said them. I remember the way his hand felt steady in mine, the way he looked at me when he promised there would never be secrets between us. And I believed him because I wanted to, not because I had proof. And for a while, things felt normal. We moved into a 2-bedroom townhouse about 15 miles outside the city. I kept my job. He continued his consulting work, which always seemed vague but important, the kind of job people do not question if they do not fully understand it. But then the pattern started again. Slow at first. One missed dinner, then a canceled weekend trip, then entire days where he was unreachable. And every time I asked, the answer was the same. Work emergency, client issue, unexpected travel. The words never changed. Only the dates did. One evening, about a year into our marriage, I was doing laundry, and his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I was not trying to look. I was not searching for anything, but the screen was bright and the message was right there. "She is asking about you again. You need to handle this." There was no name saved, just a number, but what stayed with me was not the message itself. It was the timestamp, too. 14 inches the afternoon, the exact time he had texted me earlier, saying he was in a meeting and could not talk. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at a sentence that did not belong in the life I thought I had. When he came home that night, I asked him directly, not accusing, just asking, "Who is this?" He did not get angry. He did not panic. He smiled, picked up his phone, and said it was a client going through a messy divorce, that sometimes people reached out in strange ways when they were stressed, and he showed me the message thread, but it was empty, completely clean, no history, no earlier texts. Just that one message I had seen, and he said, "You know how these things go, people text once and then disappear." And he kissed my forehead like that should be enough. Like that should close the question, and I let it. Not because I believed him fully, but because I did not know how to prove that something was wrong without sounding paranoid. But that was the moment the doubt stopped being quiet. It settled somewhere deeper, somewhere I could not ignore, even when I tried. Weeks later, I noticed something else, a charge on our joint credit card. $486.27 at a grocery store I had never heard of, in a town 2 hours away. When I asked him, he said it must have been a mistake, a duplicate charge, something the bank would fix, but the charge stayed, and a few days after that, there was another one, smaller this time, same town, same unfamiliar name. I started writing them down without telling him, dates, amounts, locations, small details that did not seem like much on their own, but together they formed a pattern I could not explain away. And then one night, everything shifted in a way I could not undo. I was using his laptop to print a document for work because mine had run out of ink, and when I opened the browser, it did not take me to a blank page. It opened to the last tab he had used, a calendar, not ours, not the one we shared, a different account entirely, and there, in clear text, were entries marked every other weekend. same location, same address, and one recurring note that stopped me cold. Pick up Lily from school. I stared at that name for a long time, long enough for the room to feel smaller, quieter, like something had shifted without making a sound. Because Daniel and I did not have a child, and in that moment, I realized I was not looking at a mistake. I was looking at a life I was never supposed to see, and the worst part was not the name. It was the realization that this had been happening for longer than I had ever imagined, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage began to collapse all at once. For 3 days after I saw that calendar, I told myself there had to be another explanation, something simple, something that would not break everything I had built. I called him the next morning while he was out of town and asked casually where he was. He said Denver, same answer he had given me the night before, and I sat there staring at my phone knowing the address on that calendar was 2 hours south of us, not 2 states away. I did not confront him right away. Instead, I sent him a message that afternoon, just one line. "Can we talk tonight? Really talk?" He replied within seconds. Of course, everything okay? And that was the moment I understood how easy it was for him to sound normal while hiding something that large. That night he came home, kissed me like nothing had changed, and I asked him about the calendar, about the name Lily, about the address. And for the first time since I had known him, he did not have a smooth answer ready. He paused, just for a second, and then said it was a mistake, a shared work account, something that had nothing to do with him. And I listened. I nodded. I even said I understood, but I could feel the distance growing between what he was saying and what I knew to be true. The next morning I drove to that address. I do not know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe a closed door that would let me pretend I had imagined everything. But instead, I saw a small blue house with a swing set in the yard and a pink backpack resting against the front steps. And I sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching a woman open the door and call out a name I had already seen written on his calendar. "Lily, come on. We are going to be late." And a little girl ran out, laughing, maybe 5 or 6 years old. And for a moment the world felt completely still, like I had stepped outside of my own life and was watching someone else's story. I did not knock. I did not speak. I just drove away because I already had my answer. When I got home, I called him again. This time, I did not ask questions. I told him what I had seen, and there was a long silence on the other end, longer than anything we had ever had between us. And then he said, quietly, "I was going to tell you." And that sentence landed heavier than anything else, not because of what it meant, but because of how easily he said it. Like this was just a delayed conversation, not a hidden life. I hung up without replying, and over the next week he tried everything. Calls that I did not answer. Emails that started with, "Please let me explain." A handwritten note left at the front door that said, "You are still my wife." Like that word meant anything after what I had seen. Even his mother called me once, her voice calm, controlled, telling me that families were complicated and that sometimes people made arrangements that others would not understand. I did not respond to her either, because by then I had realized something important. I was the only one who had been left out of a truth that everyone else seemed to accept, and there was nothing left for me to fix. Nothing left for me to ask for. The last message he sent came late one night, just 3 words, "Come home, please." And I stared at it for a long time before turning off my phone, not out of anger, not out of pain, but because for the first time since all of this began, I understood that I was not the one who needed to come back, and that was the moment I stopped trying to save something that had never really been mine and started deciding what I was going to do next. The first thing I did was open a new bank account in my name only, not because I felt strong, but because I knew I could not afford to stay where I had been. I moved out of the townhouse within 2 weeks, packed everything I owned into my car, and drove 20 miles north to a small 1-bedroom apartment above a grocery store. The kind of place where the floors creak and the windows rattle when trucks pass by, and, for the first time in years, everything in that space belonged to me. There were no locked phones, no missing weekends, no questions I was afraid to ask, just silence. And at first that silence felt heavy, like something was missing. But slowly, it started to feel like space, like room to breathe. I went back to work full-time, picked up extra clients, stayed late without needing to explain where I was or who I was with, and there was a kind of quiet clarity in that routine. Numbers made sense in a way people did not. They added up or they did not. There was no pretending otherwise. A month later, I signed up for a certification program I had been putting off for years because Daniel always said the timing was not right. Classes twice a week, 3 hours each. I sat in the back at first, listening more than speaking, relearning how to trust my own judgment, how to make decisions without checking if someone else approved. And over time, something shifted, not all at once, not in a dramatic way, but in small, steady steps. I stopped looking at my phone, expecting his name to appear. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, trying to find the moment I could have changed the outcome. And instead, I started noticing other things. The way the morning light came through my kitchen window, the sound of my own footsteps in a place that was entirely mine, the feeling of finishing something I had started without anyone else's influence. 3 months later, I received a letter in the mail, a plain white envelope with my name typed neatly across the front. Inside was a formal offer from a mid-sized firm downtown, a full-time position with benefits, a title I had worked toward for years but never believed I would reach. And when I walked into that office on my first day, they handed me a small piece of plastic with my name printed clearly beneath the company logo. Emily Carter, Senior Financial Analyst. And I remember holding it in my hand for a second longer than necessary because it felt like proof of something I had not been able to see before, not success in the way people talk about it, but stability, something built slowly, honestly. Without anyone hiding parts of the truth from me, I did not tell my parents, I did not tell his family, I did not tell anyone who had been part of that old life, because this was not something I needed to explain or justify, it was simply mine. And by the time November came around again, the cold air settling in, the same holiday approaching, I realized I was no longer the person who had sat at that table waiting for answers. I was someone else entirely, someone who did not need them. And that is how I found myself walking back into that house 3 weeks ago, not to fix anything, not to ask anything, but to stand there knowing something they did not, something I had been quietly building since the day I walked away. And when my father-in-law raised his glass and started to speak, I did not look at my husband first. I just listened, because this time, I already knew exactly what was coming. 3 weeks after that dinner, my life is quieter in a way I did not think was possible. Not empty, not broken, just clear. I wake up in a place where every decision is mine, where there are no half-truths waiting behind closed doors. And sometimes I still think about that moment at the table, the sound of his father's voice, the way the room shifted, but it no longer feels like something that happened to me. It feels like something that showed me who I needed to become. That night, after he spoke, I did not raise my voice. I did not ask questions. I simply reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table, not aggressively, just carefully, like it belonged there. Inside were copies of everything I had found, the charges, the address, the calendar entries, dates lined up in a way that no explanation could soften. His mother looked down first. Her expression did not change, but her silence said enough. His father stopped mid-sentence, and for the first time that night, he looked at me instead of through me. Daniel finally spoke, quietly, almost like he was asking for permission, but there was nothing left to give him. I did not accuse him. I did not need to. The truth was already sitting between us, I just said. You do not need to explain anything. I already understand. And that was the moment everything settled. Not fixed, not healed, but settled, like dust after something breaks. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of that house without waiting for anyone to stop me, because no one did. And that told me more than anything else ever could. The hardest part was not leaving. It was accepting that I had stayed as long as I did. But that is something I have learned to forgive myself for, because sometimes we do not see clearly until we are ready to. What I know now is simple. Love without truth is not love. And silence can be just as loud as betrayal if you listen closely enough. If you are listening to this and something in your life does not feel right, do not ignore that feeling. Your intuition is not there to make you afraid. It is there to protect you, protect your time, your energy, your peace, your financial independence, your sense of self. Do not hand those things over just because someone promises you stability. Real stability does not ask you to doubt yourself. It supports you in knowing who you are. And if you believe in something greater, whether you call it God, the universe, or simply your own inner voice, trust that it will guide you toward clarity even when the path feels uncertain. I am Emily Carter. I am 31 years old, and the lesson I carry with me is this: never build your life on a version of the truth you did not verify yourself. Thank you for being here, for listening, for allowing this story to be shared. If it resonated with you, you are not alone in what you are feeling. And there are more stories like this waiting for you. Stories about truth, strength, and finding your way back to yourself. You can explore them next. Take your time, and when you are ready, I will be here.